Hello, my name is Marianne and I'm an alcoholic. I'd like to welcome you to Recovery in Action, Life on Life's Terms. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're glad you're all here, especially newcomers, in keeping with our singleness of purpose and our third tradition, which states that the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. We ask that all who participate confine their discussion to their problems with alcohol. This is an open Big Book step study meeting where we discuss the 12 steps of recovery as they're written in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, with the focus on their application in everyday life and recovery. This is the 14th session of the 7th cycle of the workshop that was presented on November 9, 2024, where we completed the 12th step. Next week, we'll start over again with a brand new cycle. If you would like to contribute to the 7th tradition, you may do so using the QR codes displayed. Contributions are applied towards the group's expenses and support our service offices. Recordings of the workshop are available, and if you would like to be placed on the distribution list, please send an email to recoveryinaction462@gmail.com to receive the links, or you can visit our YouTube channel. The workshop typically begins with a brief meditation in which an inspirational music video is played. Because of copyright restrictions, it cannot be on the video. However, a link is provided, and I suggest you take a minute, view the video, and take a brief meditation for yourself before you begin the workshop. As the recording begins, the workshop is already in session. Feel free to contact me if you have any additional questions or require my assistance further. I hope you enjoy the workshop. Another custom of this group is to start the workshop by saying the full version of the Serenity Prayer. We're all familiar with the first part, but many of us are unaware that there is a second part to it, and I believe it's this second part of the prayer that reflects what recovery is all about. So if you would all please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking as he did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. So we are now looking at the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is the book of instructions on how to work the 12 steps. And the 12 steps are the set of instructions on how to get rid of the things that are blocking us off from our higher power, how to get connected to God, and how to stay surrendered from alcohol making our life unmanageable. However, merely reading the book without experiencing it is an exercise in futility, because in order to learn how to swim, you've got to jump in the water. You can't just learn how to swim by just reading the instruction manual. You have to get in the water and basically practice, 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 and keep paddling and kicking like crazy, quite frankly. So when we get into the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, the cover page states that this is the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. That means the problem is removed. I don't have to make a choice as to whether I drink or not, because I don't even think about drinking. I turn to God instead of alcohol. It's no longer an option to solve my problems. Selfishness and self-centeredness are gone. I'm no longer angry, fearful, or harmful, and my old destructive ways of thinking and acting have been replaced by new and peaceful ones. Then we look at the 10th step promise, which is on page 84 of the Big Book, which has now become a way of life. It states, and we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. For by this time sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That's the miracle of it. We're not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we had been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We've not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. That's our experience. That's how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. Then we jump over to page 27 of the big book, which defines recovered as ideas, emotions, and attitudes which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. Then we move from the front of the book to the back of the book in the appendix on the spiritual experience, which describes recovered as a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. And then we move to the foreword of the first edition, which states that we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. And it later goes on to say that the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. However, the desire to stop drinking is not the only requirement to become recovered. There are other things involved, such as being willing and actually doing everything that the big book says to do. And that means to work the steps. So that's where we start looking at step one. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Step one starts with the doctor's opinion and goes through to page 46. Then what we talk about in step one is self-knowledge. I've got to know that I am an alcoholic. However, as a real alcoholic, the only thing self-knowledge does is make me realize that I cannot take just one drink without being physically driven to take one drink after the other. This then allows me the opportunity, if I'm spiritually fit, to pass on that first drink. And I can only do this on a continuous basis if I'm connected to my higher power, which brings me to step two. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And the most liberating part about this is that we don't have to come up with someone else's concept of a higher power. We can come up with our own. And the only requirement for step two is to answer yes to this question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than me that can solve my problem? When I answer yes to that question, I'm at step three. I'm at the decision-making point. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood it. I'm only making a decision. And what I'm doing in step three is offering myself to God. This is the third step prayer, where I'm asking God if I can do his will. I'm basically saying, I'm offering myself to thee to build with me and do with me as thou wilt. This is what I'm asking God to do. I'm asking God to relieve me of the bondage of self. I'm asking God to take away my difficulties. And I'm saying, may I do thy will always. I'm asking. That's what I'm doing here. I'm asking. So that brings me to, now I've asked, I've got to go through the preparation process, or in religious orders, for example, they call it formation. But what it basically is I am getting myself ready to do God's will. I've asked his permission. Now I'm saying, this is what I'm willing to do. And that brings me to step four, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. We have four inventories that we do in our fourth step, which has to do with our resentments, our fears, and the harms that we've done to others, including and excluding our sexual conduct. And what we look at once we get into our inventories is we find that in most cases it was our self esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relations, including sex, were hurt or threatened. On our grudge list, we set opposite each name our injuries. Was it our self esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations that had been interfered with? And that brings us to the parts of self. It's our self esteem, our pocketbook, our emotional security, our ambitions, our personal relations, and our sex relationships. And this is where we look at where had we been selfish, dishonest, self seeking, and frightened. Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. This is straight from page 67. What this boils down to is 5 main character defects that we have identified. And these 5 main character defects are I'm selfish, I'm dishonest, I'm self-seeking, I'm frightened, and I'm inconsiderate. And then these main character defects kind of branch out into additional character defects. Things like I'm bossy, I'm entitled, I'm intolerant, I'm jealous, I'm judgmental, I'm lustful, I'm a people pleaser, I'm thoughtless, I'm two-faced. All of these others roll up into these 5 main character defects. And we list these specific character defects because the big book lists things like mean, egotistical, indignant, self-pitying, and self-centered and self-delusional. Steps 6 and 7, when we get there, state that we're ready to let God remove from us all of the things which we have admitted are objectionable and every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. So while every character defect falls within the major 5 or a combination of them, it's better to be more specific. So for example, people pleasing is really being dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened all at the same time. But people pleasing gives a more accurate description of what I'm actually doing. This is important because we repeat what we don't repair. If we don't work on these character defects, then the same situations are going to keep coming up over and over and over again. And they keep coming up because our character defects come into play. Remember, it's not the person listed in the column of your inventory that's causing your unhappiness, but character defects that are coming into play. Keep in mind that we are not bad people trying to get good, but sick people who are trying to get well. We may have done some pretty awful things, but those things do not define who we really are, and we've done nothing that we need to be punished for. When we get to steps 8 and 9, we take actions to correct these harms. But these are things that are really important, which is why I spend more time in this review, because when we're working the steps, we end up with the same personality no matter who we're with. And once our character defects are removed, we no longer have the negative consequences brought into existence by the behaviors we had when we were at step 1, nor do we have inappropriate reactions to what's going on around us. That's my problem. I have inappropriate reactions to things that are going on around me. So when I no longer have these inappropriate reactions, all of my relationships change. So, as a result of all of this, when the rest of the steps are done, any remaining resentments may go away in a very short period of time. However, it's important to note here that God will only do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. So, when we look at column 4 of our fear and harms inventories, that's where we listed the things that we're capable of doing. These are our action plans for change. That brings us to step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. It's important to note here that step 5 is done so we can see what's blocking us off from our higher power and what's causing our problems. The purpose of step 5 is to have the things blocking you off from your higher power revealed. So once you sit down with another human being and you go through your inventory, you're going to see what is blocking you off from that relationship with your higher power. So once you do step 5, the instructions for steps 4 and 5, which are the steps that deal with us, are completed. And this is where we move into step 6 and 7, which is where a shift takes place. With step 6 and 7, we start talking to God and looking to Him for His help. So step 6 is we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. We went through our inventory. We listed all our character defects. And now we read over the list of the character defects and we have one question. Do you want them removed? Hopefully your answer is yes. If you're not ready to have them removed, you've got more prayer work to do. But hopefully your answer is yes. If you're not willing, you've got to pray for the willingness. But in in looking at what we're focusing on here, yes, we're going to say yes, we want them removed. So that now we're at step 7. Humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. This is where we start to ask God. Remember, we made an offer to God. We offered to God, okay, so now we're going through the preparation process. We sat down with another human being. We looked at our character defects. And now we're at the 7th step prayer, where we're saying, okay, God, you can have all of me, the good and the bad. Please remove from me all of these defects of character, which are standing in the way of my usefulness to you. Grant me the strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. This is where I'm saying, okay, God, you've got me. Take it. And remember, too, that we do not need to have all our character defects lifted from us at once, nor will they be lifted immediately. We only have to be continuously nudged in the right direction. And the nudge from God comes with our morning prayer. So each morning we're praying to God, okay, please stop me from being whatever character defect and teach me to be the character asset, which is the opposite of the defect. And we do each defect separately. So for example, I would say, please God, stop me from being lazy and teach me to be someone who does what's needed immediately. Please stop me from being jealous and teach me to be happy for others. Please stop me from being mean-spirited and teach me to be kind. And throughout the day, when your character defects crop up, and they will, take a deep breath, ask God to stop you from being the character defect and teach you to be the opposite, naming the character defect and its opposite. And then the most important part is you act as if you're someone who has that character defect. Remember, God will not remove your defects. He will not immediately remove your defects. Nature abhors a vacuum. If the character defects are removed and you don't have the right thing to replace it with, something that may not enhance your life has a chance of coming in and being the replacement. So, in other words, I'm not going to drink, so I'll smoke weed. Or I'm not going to smoke weed, so I'll gamble. Or I could pick up another addiction
if I'm not ready. And we have to be very careful for that because as an alcoholic, I am looking for something to replace those things. So God's going to give me the opportunities to practice the character asset. And when he thinks I've learned enough, he's going to remove that character defect. And all of a sudden, one day, we'll find ourselves in a situation and we'll realize that character defect is gone. Step 7, and the use of step 7 and step 10 is where the remaining character defects get removed. And this is where we're living life. We're out there living life, and we live our lives shaped by our habits, which is a past action repeated so often that it becomes automatic. And as alcoholics, our fight or flight response gets triggered so easily, and our character defects have been repeated so often that they are our automatic, unconscious response to having a part of ourselves hurt, threatened, or interfered with. And they've come into play, and at a particular point in our life, it may have been appropriate, but they've outlived their usefulness and now they cause problems for us. And this is where we inserted the work from Dr. Stephen Covey with the stimulus response model, where we separate the stimulus from the response and we pause. We don't react, we pause. As my grandmother used to say, take a deep breath, count to 10. And that's where we get into Covey's model of the circle of concern and circle of influence, and how the serenity prayer overlays that. Because when we're looking at this decision-making tool, which we're encountering this every day, I have to make a decision. Is this something that these things in this larger circle are the area of concern, things I might have a concern about? The things in the smaller circle here are the things that I can influence, where I have some power and control. And then I need to have the wisdom to know the difference, because I have to accept the things I cannot change. And I have to have the courage to change the things I can. And I need to know what I can change and what I can't. And that brings us back to the proactivity model, which is, I love this because it gives us a visual of something happens, we separate the stimulus response, we fall into the four endowments of the human personality of self-awareness, imagination, conscience, and independent will. And then that is my decision-making tool, which I choose the best response, which is what's going to give me my response to that situation. And when we talk about step 7 and the use of step 7 and step 10, it teaches us not to react inappropriately to all of those everyday situations that we misinterpret as threatening. Because when I am reacting, my brain is making up stuff that is probably not true. So I have to be able to look at that. What step 7 teaches me is the things that are unmanageable in my life, the things that upset me, and the things that I'm afraid of. And all of these things are caused by my distortion of what's actually going on around me, and me giving more credit and attention to these things than they deserve. And then my character defect comes in and I start making up stuff in my head. We hear people talking about that itty bitty committee that goes on in our head, and we drive ourselves crazy with that. So when we get to this is step 7. This is part of the living life on life's terms stuff, because stuff is going to come up because my character defects are there. So steps 8 and 9 now taught me that I'm cleaning up the wreckage of the past. That's what steps 8 and 9 do. And now I'm doing step 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed, and became willing to make amends to them all. Then step 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. So steps 7 and 9 are kind of worked simultaneously in that we're living life on life's terms and we're asking God to remove our character defects. And in step 9, we're making our amends wherever possible. So that's part of, you see how they work interchangeably for so long. I never really saw that. But step 7 and 9 work interchangeably because we're living life, we're making amends, we're going along, living our life on life's terms. So that's step 9. We do step 9 to set right the wrongs of the past and clean up our side of the street. Once we do step 9, we're done spending any more time feeling guilty. If some of the people we've harmed choose to hold on to their pain, or if they choose to bear a grudge even in the face of our sincere request for forgiveness, we must realize that we're free from the burden of the wrong, and whatever they do, they do. When we've completed the previous 8 steps, we're a different person than who we were at step 1. Each step gives us the strength to do the next. After doing step 7, some of your character defects will have either been removed or diminished, and you'll have the experience of acting as if you're the opposite. This is good because then you won't react inappropriately or retaliate if any of your step 9s don't go smoothly. When you've done step 8, you're going to want to set right the wrongs from the past. And because you have God in your life, you begin to realize that the outcome of everything, including your step 9 amends, are totally in God's hands. And by this point, it's okay. And this is where we look at the 9th step promises. And I'm not going to read them, but it basically boils down to we suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Which brings us to step 10. Continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. This thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. We vigorously commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past, and this is where we've entered the world of the spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. Continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When these crop up, notice it says when, not if. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately and make amends quickly if we have harmed anyone. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Love and tolerance is our code. Note, it states we ask God at once to remove them. This means we go to God at once. It does not mean we tell God to immediately remove our defects of character. We do a step 10 as soon as we notice that twinge that tells us that something's just not quite right. The nightly review is not step 10. The nightly review is part of step 11. Step 10 is done immediately. Step 10 is your higher power's way of giving you a chance to act as if you are the opposite of your character defects. So once you get to step 10, you stop doing the step 7 morning prayers of asking for the character defects to be removed and being taught their opposites, because in step 10, God decides which ones he wants you to work on. And he'll give you the opportunities and the lessons you're supposed to learn. Step 10 is doing the exact same thing we did in steps 4 through 9. While what we did in steps 4 through 9 originally was used to clean up the things from the past, step 10 is used immediately to clean up things as they happen from this point forward. So we do steps 4 through 9 once, then we do the process in step 10 when we continue to do it again and again and again. So step 10 is a very important step because this is where you start to become recovered. Remember, you start doing step 10. When you start doing step 10, your life is not all of a sudden going to hell. What's actually happening is God's allowing you to be in situations where you can learn to practice the opposite of your character defects. And therefore, you want to learn those lessons quickly because remember, you made that decision to let God be in charge in step 3. You gave God permission to mold you into who he wants you to be in step 7. In step 10, he starts that transformation, and that's where it's continuous. He starts that transformation, and he's going to do what he needs to do to get your attention. So by doing steps 1 through 9 properly, you remove the things blocking you off from your higher power. And now there's nothing interfering with you receiving messages, lessons in step 10, and guidance in step 11 from your higher power. And we do have the step 10 worksheets that are on the Google Drive. Remember, step 10 is used the moment anything disturbs your peace of mind. It's an ongoing process. It doesn't matter if it's a small inconvenience or a giant hit to your ego or something in between. Any resentment, fear, and or harm disturbing your peace of mind interferes with your connection to your higher power. So you're going to do a step 10 whenever you have a resentment, a fear, or if you have a harm, a mean thought, or you actually hurt someone. Remember, the difference between steps 10 and 11 is that step 10 is done immediately, clean things up as they occur. Step 11 is part of the nightly review. So when we go from step 10 to step 11, we just have to remember to be content with whatever God is bringing to us. And everything is an opportunity to deepen your connection with your higher power, which is the thinking, which brings us to step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. Step 11 is where I carry out the decision I made in step 3 to turn my will and my life over to the care of God. My prayer life changes. I stop telling God what he should do, and I have 2 prayers. I have gratitude, and then I'm asking for direction. So when we look at step 11, it states when we retire at night, we constructively review our day. I'm looking for anything that needs to be corrected on what lessons I need. On awakening, I think about the 24 hours ahead. What do I do during the day? I stay connected to my higher power. I reconnect as needed, and I'm constantly looking for guidance and inspiration. And then just the 11th step prayer is where we're asking God to make us that channel, so that we're giving him that permission to use us, which brings us now finally to step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So the instructions for the part of step 12 that covers carrying the message and sponsoring are found in chapter 7 entitled Working with Others. This chapter tells me why I should sponsor. On page 89, it states that practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. And there's some other thoughts about sponsoring. So first we think about, well, who should be your sponsor? I have a couple of examples. Example 1 is I'm someone who has pain in my knee, and every time I walk, This is because I have arthritis in my knee and there's no cartilage and the bone is deteriorating. I hear there's a meeting of people who had knee pain when they walk, but now they don't have knee pain anymore. So I go to the meeting and I get a sponsor to give me advice on how to fix my knee pain. The truth about the person I picked is that she's someone who last month was walking her dog and tripped and fell and hurt her knee when she walked. So she went home. She put her leg up, put ice on it, and took Tylenol. After a few weeks, she was able to walk without pain in her knee. Now, for this example, this person is not a good person for me to have as a sponsor because the only thing what they did to solve their problem, which was a bruised knee, is not the same as my problem, which is arthritis in my knee and the bone rubbing against the bone. The only thing that might work for me might be knee replacement surgery. So that's one example. Another example is okay, I'm a real alcoholic and I can't stop drinking. I lost my job, my family, my home, everyone's respect, and yet I keep on drinking because it's impossible for me not to put alcohol in my body. I go to AA, I get a sponsor, but the truth about the person that I picked is that he's someone who has a few beers on, and one New Year's Eve, he went out with his friends and had 4 drinks. Then he and his friends decided to leave the party and go somewhere else, and they got pulled over, and the police officer performed a breathalyzer test on him. He got a DWI, had to go to court, and the judge ordered him to go to AA if he wanted to avoid going to jail. This person would not be a good sponsor for me because he doesn't have the same problem I do. He's not a real alcoholic. What he might be able to just stop drinking with no problem, but I'm a real alcoholic. The only thing that's going to work for me is working the steps as outlined in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. The reason for using these examples is to point out if you're an alcoholic, you need another alcoholic as your sponsor, someone who will teach you the only thing that can overcome the effects of that addiction to alcohol, and that's working the 12 steps. And that's where we can really do harm to people if we're not a real alcoholic and we're just telling someone just don't drink and go to meetings. If you're not a real alcoholic, maybe just not drinking and going to meetings will work for you. But as far as me as a real alcoholic, I need to have someone show me how to work the steps and have the spiritual solution. So that's what we have to look for when we're looking for a sponsor. Next, who should you sponsor? Well, the same is true for being a sponsor. If you're an alcoholic who has not worked the steps, you may be able to get someone started with the tools of the program. But in the long run, by not teaching them how to connect to their higher power and rely on Him, you could be doing them a disservice because they may keep relapsing and continue to be angry, fearful, and harmful. And that is one of the heartbreaking things that we see in our meetings. There are people dying in the back of the room because no one is taking them through the steps. And that what happens is they become discouraged and they believe that AA does not work. AA does work for alcoholics, but only if they know about and are taught and live in the solution. A sponsor is someone who has had the same difficulty, that he obviously knows what he is talking about, that his whole department shouts at the new prospects that he is a man with a real answer, that he has no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatsoever except the sincere desire to be helpful, that there are no fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured. And that's something that's right on page 18 of the Big Book. The other thing is Don't be discouraged. This is from page 96. If you're dealing with a difficult or an unwilling sponsee, the big book also says, do not be discouraged. If your prospect does not respond at once, search out another alcoholic and try again. You're sure to find someone desperate enough to accept with eagerness what you have to offer. We find it a waste of time to keep chasing a man who cannot or will not work with you. It does not say to drop someone immediately if they relapse, but it does say not to waste any time on someone who's unwilling to receive what I'm offering. And what I'm offering is to be their teacher, not their higher power, not their life coach, not their mother, doctor, psychiatrist, or sounding board for their complaints, just their teacher, using the big book as the textbook on how to get rid of the things blocking them off from their higher power, how to get connected to God, and how to stay surrendered. This is critical because you can't give something that you haven't got. So you need to make sure that you're spiritually fit by having worked the first 9 steps and then living steps 10, 11, and 12 as described in the big book every day. Make sure that you know and follow these instructions from the big book. The important point is to be sure your desire to sponsor is not egotistical, but is instead based on wanting to be helpful. Step 12 states, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. This promises me if I work the first 11 steps properly, I will have a spiritual awakening. Also, by living steps 10, 11, and 12, I continuously have one spiritual experience after another. And because I'm connected to and guided by and have a relationship with my higher power, it's a continuous experience. So the first action I need to take for step 12 is to carry the message to Alcoholics Anonymous. The message here is that there is a way out of all this misery. Just do exactly what it states to do in the first 164 pages of the big book. If you do, you'll never drink again, nor will you feel as bad as you do right now. Another action I need to take in step 12 is to practice these principles in all our affairs. You cannot plan the outcome of this work. A farmer cannot control his or her crops, but can till the soil, plant the best seeds, water the soil well, and nurture the crops as best as he or she can. None of this will guarantee a good harvest, but ignoring these will guarantee a poor one. So we plant the seeds of sobriety and recovery in the soil of our lives. We water these with watchfulness and prayer, and we wait for things to happen in God's time. And to close, I want to leave you with Bill's words from page 164 of the Big Book chapter, A Vision for You. He states, and this is the 12 steps summed up in one paragraph: abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless and keep you until then. He wrote this before he wrote the steps. So I thank all of you for listening to me, and now we're at the point where we can open it up for discussion.
Thank you so much for your participation. I hope you enjoyed the workshop, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. And now, please join me in our closing prayer, which is St. Faustina's Prayer for Mercy. Eternal God, in whom mercy is endless and the treasury of compassion inexhaustible, Look kindly upon us and increase your mercy in us, that in difficult moments we might not despair nor become despondent, but with great confidence submit ourselves to your holy will, which is love and mercy itself. Amen.